What's up, y'all? Talon here. Today we're going to be going over the results from the Los Angeles Regional, the last American Regional before the North American International Championship. A lot of interesting developments in the metagame, so we have a lot to cover, but if you guys enjoy these type of videos, please subscribe to the channel. And with all that being said, let's hop into it. So let's look at the winner of the event. It was actually Montana Mott winning his first regional championship with Calyrex-Shadow Rider, a Pokemon a lot of people were sleeping on this event, but it ended up taking its two biggest placements this year, getting a top 4 with Adi in this kind of bulkier Calm Mind variant, and then this Nasty Plot Astral Tag, really offensive one, but I feel like this team is more balancy than it appears to be. You do have the Tailwind mode, you have the Urshifu, but the Calyrex is a fairly bit bulkier than you might expect, and it has a Spell Tag, no Leftovers or Covert Cloak, but still a lot of defense on this team, especially with the Clefairy winning its first regional. Wolf actually got first place in the first grassroots tournament with a team very similar to this. I don't actually know if it was a Choice Scarf Urshifu or the Focus Sash, but beyond that, it was very similar sets. He was the, I believe, Psychic one, maybe Tera Ghost, but at this point, we have developed to the point in the metagame where the smooching Calyrex-Shadow, I've heard a lot of people call it different things, smooching, slurping, but essentially the focus is getting the Nasty Plot up. If you take some damage, it's fine. You have Follow Me with Clefairy to redirect, Heal Pulse, and then Tera Fairy Draining Kiss at +2. Is healing enough that even if you take an initial hit in the battle, you can heal back up near full. That happened in the finals. He was able to, Montana was able to Draining Kiss against things like Raging Bolt, Calyrex, Ice at neutral, and just be able, well, not at neutral, but at like +3 or +4, it was able to take 1-hit knockouts and heal Calyrex all the way back to full with no way to effectively deal with that. You had Taunt on Incineroar to stop Trick Room, U-turn to be able to pivot in and out to your Clefairy and be able to Follow Me, things like Thunderclap or Sucker Punch away from your Calyrex, and then you have the alternative offensive mode with the Urshifu Rapid Strike, Terra Water, in rain next to the Tornadus. Overall, it's just a very well-built team, kind of showing that the basically the Calyrex-Shadow, if you ignore it long enough, if you stop tech encounters onto your team, eventually you are going to get matchup checked, and this is kind of what happened. Everyone was disrespecting Calyrex. Miraidon and Koraidon usage, I think, is kind of representative of that. Placing all your baskets on an offensive restricted that still gets outsped by Calyrex-Shadow is definitely something a lot of people were exploiting in this tournament. Moving to the second place team, again, very similar to things we saw, I believe, in the first Indianapolis regional of the format. The Booster Energy Terra Electric Raging Bolt, piloted by Ryan Haig, to second place. Everything is very, very similar to what we were seeing, except for a Terra Fire Calyrex Ice instead of Terra Grass. I think we have seen a lot of movement away from the Terra Grass just because it does so poorly against the mirror. You just have to find other ways to beat Amoonguss essentially, but this one, yeah, Terra Fire definitely proved to be really solid in all the games except for the finals. Just the Terra Fire able to wall out Zacian among other Pokemon and be very difficult to deal with. The really big tech on this team, I would say, is actually the Terra Ghost on the Urshifu and the Helping Hand. So this essentially lets you go for Helping Hand plus Terra Ghost Rapid Strike Urshifu against a Fake Out lead and just take a quick knockout. That was threatened against Kian Campbell in the first game of semifinals, and he just straight up went for the Helping Hand close combat without tearing, I believe, taking that knockout unexpectedly against an opposing Urshifu, which you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. You'd kind of be locked down by Fake Out and have to Terra one of your Pokemon. In this case, you just are able to Helping Hand before Fake Out and go for great offense that way. Overall, it's a very standard core that we have been seeing for a while, so just props to Ryan for being able to pilot it. I believe Ryan was actually 15-2 at the end of the tournament. He lost his first and last match and then won 15 in between to make finals, so really incredible performance from him. Congrats to the second place. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this might be his second place tournament, so definitely a win on the way for this really talented player. And then moving to probably the most interesting team in the top cut is Kian Campbell's Zacian team, which is able to get third place. He probably should have beat Ryan. I'm not exactly sure what would have happened if he had not missed the high horsepower on the Raging Bolt in top 4 in game 3. He would have gotten a free Calyrex switch in against 2 grass types, so there is some argument he still could have won, but the Umbreon still could have turned things around. I'm not exactly sure, but he would have been in a weird spot against the Calyrex. But losing that high horsepower pretty much lost him the game on the spot. Despite the bad luck in top 4, Kian played an excellent tournament, and honestly every stream game was very impressive as well. We're going to look in the team now. And for 5 of the 6 of the Pokemon here, it does kind of look exactly how you would build out a Zacian team. You have the Chenpao boosting the Zacian's power with the Sword of Ruin, Urshifu to be able to one-hit KO Incineroar, which does want to switch in on Zacian and Intimidate a bunch of times. Swords Dance to basically mitigate those Intimidate's Parting Shot chains. Rillaboom with Terra Ground is interesting. You're hitting really hard with your high horsepower. You can become immune to a Miraidon Electro Drift, which would otherwise probably do like 70% in terrain, but yeah, your Rillaboom's your main weapon against Miraidon. Then Tornadus is smart just to be able to handle faster opposing hyper-offensive teams. Just the option to go for Tailwind plus Zacian, you're able to outspeed these base 135 Pokemon that would otherwise kind of have an uncontested speed advantage in a lot of battles against everything but Calyrex-Shadow, but Zacian is one of the few things that is in between those speed tiers and can take advantage of that to great effect. It was taking some crazy hits on stream, so it wouldn't surprise me if it was not max speed. Just trying to take a hit, go for Swords Dance, and deal insane damage with Tera Fairy. +2, I guess +3 Play Rough. Aside from the Zacian, I do think a lot of people key in on the Umbreon, which makes a lot of sense. It's a Pokemon that probably doesn't come in most matchups, but against Calyrex-Shadow, you're able to Snarl it pretty freely if it is not Covert Cloak. You can yawn against more defensive pivoty teams and kind of pin things. Taunt deals with Amoonguss very well, along with Safety Goggles. You can taunt a Calyrex trying to set up Trick Room, also Foul Play it for a 2-hit KO pretty easily. Might even be a 1-hit KO if the Calyrex is at +1. So a lot of really excellent tools on the Umbreon that Keen was able to leverage in more common matchups, namely the Calyrex Ice and the Calyrex Shadow, to make it very miserable for your team to play against. I do want to say, I think techs like this are really smart. We saw it with Michael Zhang's Chandelure, essentially just having a Pokemon that is very keyed into one matchup that you might be a little weaker into otherwise, that your opponent isn't familiar with playing against, can be really effective at winning those matchups that otherwise would be kind of not favored for your restricted Pokemon. Moving into the rest of the top 8, we have 2 Calyrex and 2 Koraidon, so I think for John Miller's team, the Rillaboom over Amoonguss, outside of that, this is a fairly standard composition. Rillaboom really swings the matchup in your favor against Miraidon, just being able to lead that, override terrain. You turn out into something like Pelipper or Incineroar and just basically fake out cycle to create pressure for your Calyrex Ice. Is really difficult to deal with for those sort of teams. And then Justin Burns' take on the team, he has the Amoonguss in that place. Again, the Incineroar. This is, I believe, the Urshifu Single Strike compared to the Urshifu Rapid Strike on John's team, but instead of a Raging Bolt in the case of Ryan, he had that Bolt Beam combo with the Thunderbolts and the Glacial Lances. We have Wild Charge and Volt Switch on the Iron Hands to be able to threaten lots of damage, do well against Terapagos, which is traditionally a kind of difficult matchup for Calyrex Ice to deal against, and then the Ditto, which is, I have to imagine, primed to beat more balancy or even hyper-offensive Calyrex-Shadow teams. Maybe let them take a KO and then sweep in the late game with a Focus Sash, Urshifu Single Strike, and your Choice Scarf Ditto copying their Calyrex-Shadow, and they can't so easily go for Tailwind to beat you in the late game just because you can very easily just knock that out early on with your Calyrex Ice. So interesting team. Not exactly sure how the Ditto mode works, but very cool nonetheless. And then we actually saw Rajan Ball, the first North American regional winner in this format, come back with the second bike. We had him win the first tournament with Miraidon. Here we have him with the Koraidon, along with Colin Heyer, who used the exact same team. Or maybe not exactly the same, but definitely the same 6 and very similar sets. So looking at the 6, I believe this is the exact same moves, and I think Tera types on both teams, Rajan's and Colin's. So we're going to look at Colin's here, but I think the main thing that stood out to me on this team was the integration of Gothitelle into the Whimsicott Encore lock. So basically, if you lead Gothitelle plus something really threatening like Raging Bolt, Koraidon, Fluttermane, Chi-Yu, really everything on the team, Gothitelle plus anything is really effective. If they double protect in front of Fake Out, you can switch into your Whimsicott in one of your slots and then have an Encore lock, which is really effective. If you switch in your offensive Pokemon or maybe even Volt Switch out on that turn, you can just be threatening an Encore while locking them in, which is kind of cool. But yeah, beyond that, the focus of this team is to hit hard and just utilize your Photosynthesis boost to its greatest effect. Fluttermane, I believe getting the speed boost and be able to go for Tera Fairy, Moonblast, and Dazzling Gleam's pretty uncontested. If Gothitelle's on the field at the same time as that, you can go for Helping Hand and deal some pretty absurd damage. And I do want to key in on the Gothitelle once again. The Shadow Tag is really difficult for opponents to deal with if you basically lead against anything that isn't a Ghost type. If it's not an Incineroar, a Volt Switcher like Iron Hands, Miraidon, it's just really difficult to deal with. So if you lead Gothitelle Chi-Yu with your Tera Ground against a Miraidon team, typically those teams don't have a lot of defensive counterplay outside of switching, so you can just outspeed Tera Ground, knock it out, and this is like very difficult for them to deal with. So very cool team. The Koraidon offense is something I actually expected to do pretty well this weekend. I called it in my preview for the event, both in the individual Pokemon and the individual team highlights. I did expect Incineroar to be a more pivotal part. Instead, the Chi-Yu replacing on Colin and Rajan's team, and I think that's a smart call, especially with Gothitelle as a response to Miraidon. So Miraidon usually can just Draco Meteor a Koraidon or a Raging Bolt and deal with it that way, but if you lead Gothitelle, Chi-Yu, and they don't lead Tailwind, basically you just have a free Fake Out into the partner and 8 Tera Ground Tera Blast, and they can't switch out if they don't have a defensive Tera at all. They're kind of just hosed. They just lose their restricted turn 1, which means they effectively can't lead in a way that loses to that, which really makes makes your planning for the game a lot easier. The combination of Koraidon with the Orichalcum Pulse setting up the Sun, like Drought, sets up the Chi-Yu to do insane damage with Heat Wave and Overheat. Gothitelle suddenly outspeeding everything with a Photosynthesis speed boost. Even in Tailwind, it's still going to outspeed an Urshifu most of the time. And then Raging Bolt, we saw was very quick, but it still was the special attack boosting variant, dealing crazy damage with Tera Electric, Photosynthesis boost. The damage output from this Pokemon is just insane, and we saw Colin go for a game plan of essentially go for an Electro Web early, Tera Electric, Electro Web into Draco or Thunderclap or Volt Switch would near KO anything that didn't resist it. So very cool team from Colin, and Rajan as well as Alex Underhill, I believe, piloted the team but had a little bit more difficulty at the tournament. Huge congrats to Rajan and Colin. I'm glad to see Koraidon finally had its moment in the sun. We did call it in the team preview, expected Koraidon either with U-Turn or paired with Gothitelle to deal with Pelipper. It would be a cool combination this weekend, and it definitely had its time here, getting 2 slots in the top 8 and almost making them the top 4. So going further on, we did have Zhengzhe using a Miraidon team with Landorus Incarnate. I think also JoeUX9 had a Landorus Incarnate over the typical Ursaluna Blood Moon. Seems like some people are pivoting away from the variant of the team using Ursaluna as a secondary Trick Room sweeper with the Farigiraf and just focusing entirely on the Farigiraf as a anti-Trick Room Pokemon. Zheng's kind of in the middle here. He has the screen set up with the Grimmsnarl, and I believe the Iron Hands is an Assault Vets, so it's not Clear Amulet close combat. It's still bidding, but it's still hitting very hard. And then the light screen reflect support for the Miraidon means that early game you can go for a Teravolt switch. Most likely you're not taking a hit, but in the late game it'll probably take 2 or 3 hits to knock out the Miraidon, even if it is super effective, which makes it very, very difficult to beat in the late game. You're just threatening so much damage with Discharge, especially with the very aggressive Landorus Incarnate. It's a very difficult team to deal with, and I'm glad to see Zhang had a great tournament with it. Here we have Michael Zhang. He was able to take 10th place, just missing out on resistance. He previously won a regional with Iron Defense Como. He built the team that Michael Kelsch was able to win the Stockholm Regional Championship with. So here we have a slight variation on the team. Looking at the smaller bits, we have the Rillaboom, Choice Band, Chien-Pao, Moltres, Zamazenta. Some small changes here. We have Terra Dragon instead of Terra Grass now. And then the Moltres is still black classes, but now it is Tailwind. This could have been Safety Goggles before, I'm not sure. But same attacking moves, but instead of Tailwind, we have Taunt. Now we have a Chandelure with Trick Room. So the function of this Pokemon is actually kind of similar to Pelipper in a way. It's here to beat Koraidon among other Pokemon, but the natural Ghost typing, allowing it to resist or be immune to the Collision Course, and then Flash Fire makes it immune to the Fire type of moves, even if you do go for a Tera. So really cool option here. The Terra Grass is very cool because it lets you be immune to Spore from Amoonguss while also being no longer weak to high horsepower from a Calyrex Ice, which means you can have Zamazenta on the field with Wide Guard and Chandelure, which lets you stay on the field and go for really strong Heat Waves, one at KOing Amoonguss, I have to imagine, with the Life Orb, and then dealing pretty close to a knockout with Heat Wave on the Calyrex Ice, I'd imagine. Shadow Ball is definitely going to be a 2 at KO, if not pretty close to a knockout with Little Chip. So very cool team from Michael. And then the last Pokemon is the Fluttermane, which is over, I believe, the Latios, but essentially the focus here is just a strong Pokemon that can slow things down. We do lack Tailwind on the Moltres. We did gain Trick Room though, which is kind of cool, but that's definitely more of an anti-hyper-offensive option, being able to Trick Room against Tailwind teams. And then the Fluttermane against more mid-speed teams can go for Icy Wind and Thunder Wave to be really disruptive. This isn't a team that you can really afford to be losing turns to Paralysis on, so I do like the Thunder Wave call from Michael here. Grant Weldon also finished at 11-3, wasn't able to make cut, but had a very interesting take on it, quite different from Kian, so I want to go over that. And so the Zacian here, instead of the Swords Dance Tera Fairy set, is actually Ironhead, Sacred Sword, Tera Blast, Ground. So this is very cool against something like a Miraidon, where originally you're immune to its Draco Meteor, and after you go for your Tera, you're immune to its Electric type moves, so you can kind of choose how you want to wall it, depending on what stage in the game it is, and that's really a cool option. The Whimsicott here has a cool tech option in Cotton Spore, so that'll pretty much always let you win the Tailwind mirror, because if you match Tailwind's turn 1, you can go for Cotton Spore in the subsequent turn and be essentially just in Tailwind against them, while the rest of your Pokemon are able to outspeed. That can be really cool for your Regidrago, which can kind of lose out in the Tailwind mirror typically, because it's not the fastest Pokemon. It hits very hard, but it's not that quick. So you can go for Whimsicott, go for Tailwind, and then Cotton Spore on the next turn. You're able to go for that Dragon Energy pretty much uncontested, and that's very cool. Chi-Yu's, Choice Scarf, and Beads of Ruin makes it a huge threat against Calyrex-Shadow, which would otherwise be kind of annoying, outspeeding Zacian, Regidrago, Ogerpon, Wellspring, and just being able to deal immense damage to the rest of the team. Having the option to resist those Astral Barrages and go for Snarl or Heat Wave or even Overheat to take a knockout is very appreciated. And then looking at the Ogerpon and the Amoonguss, I have to imagine these are here just to redirect attention for the Regidrago and the Zacian to go for their sweeps, but overall very cool team to grant. Very hyper offensive team that I'm hoping to be able to feature on the channel. I believe he listed a rental team from the tournament, so we'll definitely give that a shot at some point. Alejandro Jimenez also had a great performance with a very unconventional team. It was Calyrex-Shadow, so a little hyper offensive, but with a Dondozo, I believe the first big finish for Dondozo in this tournament. So looking into that, we have Indeedee plus Calyrex-Shadow for Expanding Force, Helping Hand, really strong damage. Not something we are unfamiliar with, but Protect on the Indeedee kind of makes things trickier where you can't so freely double into that and take a knockout. You are kind of just like bluffing, okay, I could Protect or I could Follow Me, similar to how Amoonguss can do, and it's really pesky to deal with, especially when a Calyrex-Shadow is on the other end of it, can go for a Tera Blast Water, take a knockout into Incineroar, Expanding Force, Astral Barrage, deals insane damage to everything else, so very deadly combo in the lead, and I think the focus of this team is probably to trade early with the Calyrex and then sweep with Dondozo and just out-trade in the late game. It is a Covert Cloak one, just being immune to Fake Out is really cool. You're not going to be able to Fake Out Wicked Blow a Dondozo this way. You can kind of deal with it in that fashion usually, but not an option here. Rock Slide, Order Up, Wave Crash. The lacking of Earthquake is definitely because the Rillaboom is on the team, which probably supports the Goodra pretty well, as well as the Calyrex-Shadow after Terrain is gone. Speaking of the Goodra, it looks very sound against Calyrex Ice with the Acid Armor Body Press set. You're Sap Sipper, so Amoonguss can't Spore you. That's really annoying to deal with. And overall, a very cool team. Really impressive to see it make the 11-3 and just miss out on Resistance there. Very different from anything we've seen thus far this season, and the first big finish for Dondozo. David here got the last top 16 finish with the Calyrex, and he has it with a Landorus Incarnate, which I think is something we're going to see become a bit more standard. The Earth Power Sludge Bomb substitute set is really effective against Zamazenta, being able to hit it in Terra Grass or in its base form, and it's also strong in a Koraidon. If you're able to redirect a Draco Meteor, you can go for an Earth Power and knock that out. So I think it's a Pokemon that we're going to see a lot more on Calyrex Ice teams, and it was able to help David get this top 16 finish. And then the last 11-3 I want to cover is Andrew Bristino. I don't want to go into too much detail. This is kind of a team that we saw in the first week of the format, the Lunala Balance Trick Room team with the Ursaluna Guts form instead of the Blood Moon, which has been a bit more dominant this format. But essentially the focus of this team is to get up Trick Room and then Parting Shot, U-Turn, and Volt Switch around until you can get your Ursaluna in with its Gust Flame Orb boost, then go for Headlong Rush, the Sod, and sweep teams that way. You also have Amoonguss. You're such a bulky team that the ability to Pollen Puff is really effective, and you're going to get a lot of turns to Rage Powder, Spore, etc. And the pivoting on this team benefits the Regenerator ability on the Amoonguss immensely. Since I went a bit more in depth than I usually do on the videos, there's a lot of interesting teams in the top 16. Usually I have to go a little bit lower to get the really interesting meta development teams. But this tour was very diverse in terms of restricted Pokemon and the supporting cast, so I didn't have to stretch too far there. But if there is a team here within the day 2 pool that you want me to see featured on the channel, go into more analysis on, definitely open to doing that. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy these type of analysis videos, please let me know in the comments. And yeah, with all that being said, please subscribe to the channel. Peace, y'all.